Well, thank you everyone for showing up for my talk. My name is Gustavo Tondello, and I'm here to... so Gustavo couldn't make it, sadly. My PhD student, former PhD student, now doctor of computer science, wrote this paper about player traits and video game preferences, player characteristics. We really wanted to investigate what models of player preferences explain game choice, and it's not this one. So we had we've of course worked in the field of player modeling and player types for a while, and really one of the oldest ones, and it's still around, is Bartle's player types model, and I love Bartle, but I hate the model, so it just needs to disappear. It was made for MUDs, it's from the 1996, it's not really useful for games research. This graphic is actually taken from a gamification at work paper from Mario Herger and some excellent colleagues. It has nothing to do with gamification. It has not a lot of implications for the games research that you're using. It is overused in the games industry. Please stop using it. Another one, and my colleague Regan Mandrick and myself and our colleague, actually Chris Bateman, are partially responsible for this one. Chris, though, was sort of the originator of this idea for brain hacks, which we published in 2014. But this was work that originated from his agency, and he did a lot of work theoretically on trying to tie some of the ideas from neurobiological findings into what I still think is a very interesting model of player theory. And I love Chris, and I hate my model, his model, our model. I don't hate it, actually. It's just, again, it is, okay, so here's the thing. It's a good model, but it's not a good questionnaire. And so to operationalize research and to make sure that this research works out, you need to sometimes acknowledge that there is a problem with how we're operationalizing it. And so I figured that that's the case, and sat down with, back then, my PhD student. This was a longer project over years and years and years. So we sat down on our magical unicorn and decided that we need to figure out how to fix this, and ended up collecting a lot of different data sets to hopefully at some point figure this out, and a couple of papers have been the result of this. So obviously there are issues with existing player type. Players do not only enjoy one type of experience. This was something that was pretty clear to us when we came up with the typology. It became even clearer to us when we submitted paper over paper and we got psychological reviewers to tell us that this was really a thing in psychology in, Elisa, what year was that? In earlier than the 2000s. You're really outdated here, people. You need to kind of get on the trait train, because in modern psychology is just, there's different camps, and traits is essentially one of the better ways of explaining it, according to a majority of psychological reviewers anyways. So we were thinking, maybe we can do something with it, you might disagree in the question after. You're already looking at me like this. I know Max also has a background in psychology. Okay, so anyway, so there is essentially a lack of a validated a good scale available for player traits, because again, in games we're a little behind. It takes a little while to catch up with things, and sometimes that's a decade. So player traits recognize that people's preferences are composed of different characteristics, not just one characteristic. So we came up with a cool player traits model, yay us, and we actually got it published at Interact recently. It is an actually validated 25-item measurement scale that I can only recommend for people to check out if they're interested in these types of personality traits. And it correlates with personality traits, so the player traits and personality traits correlates. This was a whole different study that we did, again, at Interact. If you're interested, you can download it at hcrgames.com/player-traits. And so the interesting thing was that it actually held up. These trades were quite nice. The names, okay, we could have come up with catchier names, but they kind of explain it: social, narrative, aesthetic, challenge, and goal orientations that we had in that model. But, we wouldn't be good researchers if we didn't know how to slice the salami appropriately. And so essentially what happened is Gustavo collected a lot of data, and I'm talking about a lot of data over the years. And we, again, analyzed this data set in one paper where we came up with a player traits model. And then we also noticed, hey, we've got this cool methodology that came out of us analyzing 50,000 responses of the original brain hacks data that actually helped us filter responses based on when people said, okay, this is the game I like. So this was actually based on when we wrote our initial, you could call it rebuttal paper about brain hacks for the International Journal of HCI. And we said, this is kind of a better way of doing this, which kind of led to the traits, which now led to us looking at, hey, so how can we actually predict some sort of preferred game styles, and how can we relate that back to player trait scores? So one sample, data sample at least, could explain the player trait scores, because that was the most recent one. But then we also had preferred game elements, playing styles, and gender and age. How do all of these things influence the choice of games? And this is based on the choice of games self-selected by the players in these questionnaires. So often you find these studies where people are trying to cluster things according to genres or things. But again, genres are based on people's interpretation. This is based on us telling you, tell us what game you like. Give us, actually the question was, please name up to 3 games that exemplify the type of games you like. And then we cleaned that data with several algorithms that we wrote about clustering and putting those games together into things. And we came up with charts and charts and charts and more charts. There's so many charts in the paper. You're going to have a good time if you like a lot of data density and charts and tables. We have a lot of that in the paper. Please read it. So I want to just, because we have a limited time in this talk, really talk about the relations between the player traits and the games that we found here. And so one of the things that we found, again, I'm going to go over these traits. Social is actually the interesting one, because to explain what social orientation means as a player trait, is that players who score high in this trait are people that like to play together with others, people that enjoy multiplayer games and competitive gaming communities, and people who score low prefer to play alone. That's kind of how you explain this trait. Again, it's a continuous scale. But as you can see, it's kind of interesting how that actually, and this is based on significance testing that we did, non-parametric with R. Holy crap, I could not have done it myself, but Gustavo pulled it all off. So pretty awesome if you want to check the stats. Belgium, it's in the paper. And so here what we can find is that it actually is a significant predictor of the type of social orientation. You can see a lot of these multiplayer games up there, which are collaborative and sometimes competitive, but basically team-based. And then we have these single-player games on the bottom mainly. So that's quite interesting how really that was significant. And then in terms of aesthetic orientation, this is a clustering for players who score high on exploring the world. Oh, geez, I gotta really score it up. So players that score high on exploring the world, enjoying the scenery and appreciating graphics, and players who score low, and then you focus more on the gameplay and the aesthetics of the game. So some people really like the exploring part, some people just like the gameplay. And you can see that here, again, a significant predictor. We've got narrative orientation, so players that score high like complex narratives and stories with games. Players that score low prefer games with less story, and might skip the story and the cutscenes and like the way of playing. Super Mario, Fortnite, Pokemon, there's story in there maybe, but not the most important bit. Challenge orientations are players who score high in like difficult games and hard challenges, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Monster Hunter, Witcher, Dark Souls, of course. Players who score low prefer easier or casual games, Zelda, Persona, Pokemon. And this could be, of course, an argument with people here that some of these games you can play in different ways, of course. Goal orientations are players that score high and enjoy completing game goals and like completed games to 100% level. and want to explore all the options, and players that score low on goal orientation want to leave optional quests or achievements unfinished. Interesting thing here is Minecraft, because as you know, Minecraft is not a game that is specifically goal-oriented, but we explained the high drive towards goal orientation there, that people are actually self-driven to complete their goals and have this idea that I really want to complete that goal. Now, age, there's also a difference. Apparently, older people really like World of Warcraft and Civilization. Younger people like Call of Duty and Borderlands and other games, Overwatch. In terms of gender, and do not despair, dear unicorns in the audience, we of course asked them to identify as non-binary and self-identify them, but we unfortunately did not have enough data to cluster it according to that, so we're using this binary cluster for gender, and I know it's not necessarily the best way of doing it, but you can see that, at least statistically, we have women preferring games like Stardew Valley, Kingdom Hearts, and men preferring Rocket League, XCOM, some of these games. Quite interesting, maybe controversial findings. Takeaways here is introduce the scale. We showed that they relate to game elements. We showed that gender and age are related to preferences. We mapped the characteristics. We created a lot of charts. How can you use this? You can better understand game tests. You can give designers and game studios more accurate insights about the audience. You can target market campaigns to the right audience. It really helps you understand your player base. And future work could be larger samples. Please use it for larger samples, further validation, correlations with other models, and compare participants' self-reported preferences with their actual behavior in games. Thank you very much. Bad rule. I actually went over, because you might see there this line, if you have questions, please send them. If you have questions.
No, if you have questions, ask them right now. With no respect.
Oh, Vero, please. Oh, my God.
Okay, thank you, Vero van der Abele.
It was a Kruskal-Wallis test.
Yeah. So, does this mean... What does this mean for Hexad? Let's assume I want to build a recommender engine, and I want this knowledge of my players. Are you suggesting that I should base my recommender on Hexad, or is that now out of the door, and should I use the trade model?
This is a very, very, very excellent question, actually. Thank you, very great question. The intention here is different, because this is work stemming out, and this is like two stepchildren we're talking about. One was our brain hacks work, which was always intended for game players, and one was Hexad, which, and this is an interesting discussion with this crowd, was always intended for gamification. And I could go off on a 10-minute rant about the difference between gamification and gameful designs versus actually game designs, because I do, and Gustavo is even stronger than me in that distinction. There is a very distinct preference whether you're designing a gameful system or you're designing a game system. And so Hexad is specifically for those gameful systems. It's a tool that you design gamification with. Whereas these player traits are definitely about real games, the kind of games that we play and engage with. So if you're building your recommender system, which I actually would love to see, next Kai play, recommender system, I would recommend that recommender system for games if you're building it with the 5-player traits. If you're building it with gamification, use Hexad.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, man. Really?
Catherine Gerling, KU Leuven, from Belgium. What's the risk of alienating minority player groups by these categorizations?
Yeah, this is, I'm just, do you want me to skip to the unicorns again? This is essentially the risk every time. This could go deeper. Every time you want to bin something quantitatively, you risk alienating people. That is just the nature of things. So, yes, I could have done qualitative work, but I chose to do quantitative work, and I chose to have a certain cutoff point. And unfortunately, that cutoff point meant eliminating some things, eliminating some game choices and preferences, eliminating some other demographic choices and preferences that were available. We did give the option, and we were yearning actually for more data in those categories. But as you know, when you run quantitative statistics, if you don't have that data, you cannot report these things. So unfortunately, I cannot report them. I would love to in the future.
Okay, I have more questions that I will ask later.
Break, and we should allow for one question outside of Belgium.
Yes, please.
So I'm from the Netherlands, which is
Oh, okay.
first of all, thank you for your playful talk. It's a really nice talk to open this in this way. So you said I like Bardol. I don't like the model, of course. I can understand it's outdated, so old. And I remember in this paper he has also this ASCII-like thing with if there are more killers, then there are less socializers. All these guys in the dependencies, right?
He also updated it 2 years later for 8 categories, which is never used. And he actually said, this is much better. Please use this new dimensionality, and nobody ever picked up on it. So yeah, and he built it for MUDs originally, for multi-user text dungeons.
But the perspective he also uses is like the interdimension between if there are more of these kinds of players, then the other kind of players will go down. Would that be possible with a trade kind of approach? Would you see something in there that you could make a game more for that person, so there will be less of that other kind of traits?
See, this is the difference, in my opinion anyways, between a trait and a type-based approach. In a type-based approach, I would say that is probably likely, but the whole idea of a trait is that you can have differently pronounced traits in the same person, right? So
They might change,
it's
right?
not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I could score high on 2 different traits that help characterize my playing preference.
Okay, so thanks again to Lennart. Thanks to all the speakers, all the presenters. Thanks to Gustavo.